The lights inside the arena burned bright as Monday Night Raw prepared to go live, but there was something different in the air tonight. Backstage personnel moved with an urgency that suggested something significant was about to happen, something that hadn't been advertised or promoted in advance. The crowd filing into their seats had no idea they were about to witness one of the most shocking announcements in recent WWE history. A declaration that would fundamentally alter the landscape of professional wrestling and send shockwaves through the entire industry. As the show's opening pyrotechnics exploded and the familiar Raw theme music blasted through the sound system, the energy in the building reached a fever pitch. Thousands of fans were on their feet, their voices creating a wall of sound that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the arena. The camera panned across the sea of faces, capturing signs ranging from clever to crude, from supportive to antagonistic, all reflecting the passionate investment that WWE fans bring to every show. But tonight would be different from every other Monday night. Tonight, the WWE Universe was about to receive news that would dominate every conversation, every social media platform, and every wrestling publication for weeks to come. The opening segment of Raw typically features a wrestler cutting a promo or engaging in some confrontation to set the tone for the evening. But as the music faded and the crowd settled into their seats, anticipating the usual proceedings, something unexpected happened. The distinctive sound of Triple H's entrance music hit without warning, causing an immediate and visceral reaction from the audience. This wasn't scheduled. This wasn't on any rundown that had leaked online. This was something spontaneous, something important, something that demanded immediate attention. Triple H emerged from behind the curtain, but he wasn't dressed in his wrestling gear. He wore an immaculately tailored suit, the kind of sharp, professional attire that signaled he was appearing in his capacity as WWE's Chief Content Officer, as the man responsible for the creative direction of the entire company. His expression was serious, focused, lacking the theatrical bravado he might display when appearing as a character. This was business. This was real. And everyone in the arena could sense it. He walked down the entrance ramp with purpose, his eyes scanning the crowd but not really seeing them, his mind clearly occupied with whatever announcement he was about to make. The audience's reaction was a mixture of excitement and confusion. Triple H appearances on Raw had become less frequent since he'd taken on more corporate responsibilities, so when he did show up, it meant something significant was happening. The speculation began immediately, with fans turning to each other, shouting theories over the noise, trying to guess what could possibly bring the game out to start the show. As Triple H entered the ring and was handed a microphone, the crowd's volume increased. Chants of Triple H echoed through the arena, a show of respect for everything he'd accomplished both as a performer and as an executive. But he raised his hand, calling for silence, and remarkably, the audience complied. The building grew quiet, everyone leaning forward in their seats, straining to hear what he was about to say. He stood in the center of the ring for a moment, letting the silence build, understanding the power of the pause in creating dramatic tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was clear, authoritative, carrying the weight of someone who had been at the top of the wrestling business for over 2 decades. He thanked the fans for their passion and their continued support of WWE, a brief pleasantry before getting to the real purpose of his appearance. Then he said the name that changed everything, Roman Reigns. The mere mention of the tribal chief's name caused an eruption of noise from the audience. Roman Reigns has been one of the most polarizing and dominant figures in WWE for years, a performer who has transcended the typical boundaries of heel and face to become something more complex, more interesting, more compelling than simple good guy or bad guy categorization. His reign as Universal Champion had been historic, spanning over 1,200 days, establishing him as one of the most dominant champions in wrestling history. Every mention of his name carried weight, carried significance, carried the promise of something major. Triple H continued, his tone measured and serious. He spoke about Roman Reigns' accomplishments, about his dominance, about his position as the tribal chief and the head of the table. But there was something in his delivery that suggested this wasn't going to be a typical praise segment. The words were complimentary, but the underlying current was something else entirely. The crowd sensed it too, growing quieter, more attentive, understanding that they needed to hear every word because something massive was coming. Then Triple H dropped the bombshell that nobody saw coming. He announced that Roman Reigns had been indefinitely suspended from WWE, effective immediately. The arena exploded. Not with cheers or boos, but with pure shock. It was a collective gasp that seemed to suck all the air out of the building before releasing it in a cacophony of disbelief. Fans jumped to their feet, their hands on their heads, their mouths hanging open. The announcement was so unexpected, so completely out of left field, that it took several seconds for people to even process what they had just heard. Triple H let the reaction wash over him, standing stoically in the ring as the crowd went absolutely wild. He didn't smile. He didn't show satisfaction or regret. He simply stood there, allowing the magnitude of his announcement to sink in. The camera operators were working overtime, capturing reactions from all corners of the arena, finding fans in various states of shock, excitement, anger, and confusion. But he wasn't finished. As the crowd's initial explosion of noise began to fade, Triple H raised the microphone again. The audience quieted once more, desperate to hear what else he had to say, what additional information he could provide about this earth-shattering development. And what he said next made the situation even more complicated, even more shocking than the initial announcement. Triple H explained that the suspension wasn't related to anything Roman Reigns had done in the ring. It wasn't about a wellness policy violation. It wasn't about conduct issues or disciplinary problems. Instead, Triple H claimed that Roman Reigns had refused to follow creative direction, had repeatedly rejected storylines and matches that WWE management had proposed, and had essentially held the company hostage with his demands and his refusal to cooperate with the creative team. The accusation was explosive. Wrestling fans understand that there's always been a tension between wrestlers' desire for creative control and management's need to run a cohesive show. But for Triple H to publicly call out Roman Reigns, one of the company's biggest stars, for essentially being difficult to work with, was unprecedented. This wasn't a worked shoot designed to blur the lines between reality and fiction. This felt real. This felt personal. This felt like genuine frustration from someone who had been dealing with a difficult situation behind the scenes and had finally decided to address it publicly. Triple H elaborated, his voice growing more intense as he spoke. He talked about how WWE had bent over backward to accommodate Roman Reigns, had given him every opportunity to succeed, had built the entire company around him for years. But according to the game, Roman had become impossible to work with, demanding approval over every aspect of his character, rejecting opponents he didn't want to work with, refusing to participate in storylines that didn't meet his standards. The speech was damning. Triple H painted a picture of a performer who had let success go to his head, who had forgotten that WWE is bigger than any one individual, who had prioritized his own ego over what was best for the company and the fans. Every sentence was carefully crafted to build a narrative of someone who had become too big for his britches, who needed to be brought back down to earth, who needed to learn that nobody is bigger than WWE itself. The crowd was hanging on every word, completely invested in this unfolding drama. Social media was already exploding with reactions, with clips of the announcement spreading across every platform imaginable. Wrestling journalists were scrambling to verify the information, to reach out to sources, to understand whether this was a legitimate suspension or an incredibly elaborate work. The line between reality and fiction had become so blurred that nobody could be entirely sure what they were witnessing. Triple H continued his announcement by explaining what this meant for WWE programming going forward. He stated that the undisputed WWE Universal Championship, which Roman Reigns had held for an unprecedented length of time, would be vacated. A tournament would begin next week to crown a new champion, giving other superstars the opportunity that Roman's dominance had denied them for so long. The implication was clear: WWE was moving on from Roman Reigns, with or without him. The announcement of a tournament to crown a new champion created another wave of excitement and speculation. Who would be involved? What format would it take? Would this be a Raw-exclusive tournament, or would it include SmackDown superstars as well? The possibilities were endless, and fans immediately began fantasy booking their ideal scenarios, debating which wrestler deserved the opportunity to step out of Roman's shadow and claim the top spot in the company. But Triple H wasn't quite finished. He addressed the camera directly now, speaking not to the live audience, but to Roman Reigns himself, wherever he might be watching. His words were pointed and personal, a direct challenge to the tribal chief. He told Roman that if he wanted to come back to WWE, if he wanted to reclaim his position at the top of the company, he would have to do so on WWE's terms, not his own. He would have to prove that he could be a team player, that he could put the company first, that he understood his role within the larger WWE ecosystem. The speech had the air of an ultimatum, a final warning before a point of no return. Triple H made it clear that while the door wasn't permanently closed on Roman Reigns returning to WWE, it also wasn't going to be left wide open indefinitely. There would be consequences for his actions, accountability for his behavior, and a need for genuine change if he ever wanted to wear a WWE championship again. As Triple H's music hit and he prepared to leave the ring, the arena was still buzzing with energy and confusion. Fans were processing what they had just witnessed, trying to separate fact from fiction, attempting to understand the real-world implications of what had been announced. The commentators at ringside were scrambling to provide context and analysis, but even they seemed genuinely shocked by what had transpired. The rest of Monday Night Raw felt almost surreal in the wake of such a massive announcement. Every segment that followed existed in the shadow of what Triple H had revealed. Wrestlers in backstage interviews were asked about Roman's suspension, with responses ranging from shock to barely concealed satisfaction. Some expressed sympathy for the tribal chief, suggesting that there must be more to the story than what had been publicly revealed. Others seemed energized by the opportunity his absence would create, openly campaigning for their chance to fill the void he had left. Social media engagement for WWE reached levels that hadn't been seen in months, possibly years. The announcement was trending worldwide across multiple platforms, with everyone from casual fans to industry insiders weighing in with their opinions. Mainstream sports media picked up the story, with outlets that don't typically cover wrestling reporting on the shocking suspension of one of WWE's biggest stars. The publicity was enormous, unprecedented, exactly the kind of attention that WWE craves. But the questions remained. Was this real? Had Roman Reigns genuinely been suspended for being difficult to work with, or was this the most elaborate work in modern wrestling history? The beauty and frustration of contemporary WWE is that it's often impossible to distinguish between legitimate backstage issues and carefully crafted storylines designed to seem real. Triple H's presentation had been so convincing, so seemingly sincere, that even the most jaded wrestling fans found themselves wondering if they had just witnessed something genuine. Wrestling journalists went into overdrive, reaching out to every source they had, trying to get confirmation or denial of the suspension's legitimacy. Some reported that Roman had indeed been having creative disagreements with management for months, that the tension had been building behind the scenes, that this announcement was the culmination of a long-brewing conflict. Others insisted that the whole thing was a work, a storyline designed to write Roman off television for a while, possibly to give him a much-needed break after years of being at the top of the card. The uncertainty was delicious for wrestling fans who love to speculate and theorize. Forum discussions exploded with thousands of posts arguing every conceivable angle. Some fans broke down Triple H's body language during the announcement, claiming they could detect signs that it was all scripted. Others pointed to specific phrases or the way certain things were worded as evidence of legitimate frustration. The debate raged on, with no clear consensus emerging. What made the situation even more intriguing was Roman Reigns' silence. In the hours and days following the announcement, the tribal chief said nothing publicly. His social media accounts remained quiet, offering no denial, no confirmation, no response whatsoever to the explosive claims Triple H had made. This silence only fueled more speculation. Was he truly blindsided by the public nature of the suspension? Was he preparing a response with lawyers and agents? Or was his silence part of the story, a calculated move to let the speculation build before making a dramatic statement or return? The wrestling world became consumed with Roman Reigns' discourse. Every podcast, every YouTube channel, every wrestling news website dedicated hours of coverage to analyzing the situation from every possible angle. Clips of Triple H's announcement were watched millions of times, with viewers scrutinizing every word, every facial expression, every inflection in his voice for clues about what was really happening. Behind the scenes, WWE was reportedly in chaos, though whether this chaos was legitimate or manufactured for the storyline remained unclear. Reports emerged of emergency creative meetings, of wrestlers being told about changes to upcoming shows, of storylines being rewritten to accommodate Roman's absence. But were these genuine last-minute changes necessitated by an unexpected suspension, or were they planned alterations that had been in the works for weeks? The announcement also sparked broader conversations about wrestler power and creative control in WWE. For years, fans and industry observers have debated how much influence top stars should have over their characters and storylines. Roman Reigns, as one of the company's biggest draws, would naturally have more leverage than most. But if Triple H's claims were true, at what point does that influence become detrimental to the overall product? At what point does accommodating one star's preferences harm the opportunities and stories available to everyone else? These questions don't have easy answers, and the wrestling community found itself split on the issue. Some argued that top stars have earned the right to have input into their characters, that they understand their personas better than anyone else, and that giving them creative freedom leads to better, more authentic performances. Others contended that wrestling is a collaborative art form, that no single performer should have veto power over creative decisions, and that WWE's responsibility is to create the best overall product rather than cater to individual egos. The announcement also had immediate implications for WWE's upcoming premium live events. WrestleMania season was approaching, the most important time of the year for the company. Plans had presumably been built around Roman Reigns being a central figure in those events. If his suspension was legitimate, or even if it was a work that would keep him off television for an extended period, WWE would need to completely restructure their biggest shows of the year. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Speculation immediately began about who would benefit from Roman's absence. Wrestlers who had been hovering just below the main event level suddenly seemed poised for elevation. Cody Rhodes, who had been building toward another confrontation with Roman, would need a new direction. Seth Rollins, Drew McIntyre, Gunther, and numerous others all became the subject of fantasy booking as fans imagined the possibilities that Roman's absence created. The tournament announcement added another layer of intrigue. A tournament to crown a new undisputed WWE Universal Champion would presumably feature the biggest names in the company. The format, the participants, the timeline, all became subjects of intense speculation and debate. Would it be a traditional single elimination tournament? A round-robin format? Would it play out over several weeks or be contained within a single premium live event? Every possibility was discussed and analyzed. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the entire situation was how it demonstrated WWE's willingness to take risks with their storytelling, assuming this was indeed a storyline. In an era when WWE is often criticized for predictable, formulaic programming, the Roman Reigns suspension announcement was anything but predictable. It was bold, shocking, and generated exactly the kind of passionate fan engagement that wrestling thrives on. Triple H, in his role as WWE's creative leader, had shown that he understood what makes wrestling compelling. Whether this was a real suspension or an elaborate work, it had people talking, speculating, engaging with WWE's product in ways they hadn't in a long time. It reminded fans that wrestling at its best is unpredictable, that shocking moments can still happen, that the line between reality and fiction can be blurred to create something genuinely exciting. As Monday Night Raw went off the air that night, the wrestling world was left reeling. The show had delivered numerous other segments, matches, and storylines, but none of them mattered. The only thing anyone was talking about was Triple H's announcement about Roman Reigns. It had completely overshadowed everything else, dominating the conversation in exactly the way WWE would want. In the following days, the story continued to develop. Wrestlers began publicly commenting on the situation, with some expressing support for Roman and others suggesting that accountability is important regardless of someone's position in the company. WWE's social media accounts posted cryptic messages and clips, keeping the story alive and ensuring it remained in the public consciousness. The announcement had also created a fascinating dynamic where fans found themselves invested in the story regardless of whether it was real or scripted. If it was real, they wanted to see how it would be resolved,